attached. So this is the Finance and Assets Working Group meeting on Monday the 9th of June. And the first item on the agenda is to elect a chair. Is there a nomination, please, for a chair for this working group?
Councillor Green.
So that's your nomination, Councillor Marlowe, yeah?
I'm happy to second that.
You're happy to second that, thank you. And show of hands, please. Brilliant, thank you very much. Congratulations.
Congratulations.
As you were the previous chair, and
Never actually got the chance to chair a meeting. I'm delighted to accept. And as I said elsewhere, if you guys want me to chair, I'm happy to chair because I got elected to serve the council, and if that's the best way I can do so, I'm happy to do that. So, have we got any apologies for absences received?
Carried due to a travel commitment.
Okay, thank you. Item 3, declaration of interest. Has anybody got any declarations of who would like to make in respect of the business that we're about to transact?
No.
Okay. The next item is the meeting minutes. Could I ask people for their thoughts on the meeting minutes? I'm conscious that we should minimise the amount of work imposed on the staff here because there's quite a lot to do. And it would be great if somebody would be willing to do the minutes and obviously seek comments from any members of the staff that attend the meetings prior to publication. Anybody willing to do the minutes of the meeting?
I'm willing to
For this one.
write the minutes.
Yeah.
Going forward. Yeah. If you're happy
For,
with that.
for this meeting and future meetings?
Yeah.
Oh, brilliant.
If the town clerk's happy with that.
Yeah,
Yeah.
that's fine.
Very happy.
Thank
Can I
you.
suggest what the process should be, that they go into the town clerk in terms of the validation? Just expanding what you said, just ultimately the town clerk will take ownership of them from Councillor Wiles, would be my preference.
I'm happy with that, that the
If she's
town
not-
clerk is,
Yeah, that's
yeah,
fine.
from a procedural point of view.
Yeah.
It's
Yeah.
Yeah,
important
just
to
one
understand.
Yeah.
Yeah.
That's fine.
You can be editor-in-chief.
Sub-editor.
But as chair, I'm happy to review the minutes as well.
I'll send it to both of you.
Yeah. Thank you.
Okay, we're flying through the agenda here. Item 5, public participation. Is there anybody that wants to make?
No request, Chair.
Okay, great. Item number 6, co-opted members. Does the meeting feel we need to co-opt anybody else to join this this working group?
Not today, I wouldn't say that. I think we need to leave it as open on the agenda because we may move into certain aspects that will benefit having somebody co-opted, but what others think?
Not at the moment. Yeah, not at the moment. In the future, we might need somebody expertise.
Okay.
What do you think, Chair?
Well, you know, I do think depending upon what we find, we may need to review this at a later date to get people in.
Good.
Okay, so that's item 6. Item 7, update from the property manager. Would you like to give us the highlights or go through the report
Yes.
that you've sent out and give us any highlights on it, please, Julie?
Yes, you know, I've sent you over the asset list. I've gone into a bit more detail than you normally get on an asset list. I mean, an asset register would typically have the property address and whether it's a property with land or without land. You wouldn't get a lot more than that. So I have gone into it in a little more detail. That was as much to do with helping me when I go through everything to be able to find the sort of key information that I need. The takeaway from it, I say takeaway, and I've actually got to the end before I started, but takeaway really is that we need now to focus in on giving the properties put into the correct names, taken out from DDC and put into the correct names, the freehold titles. That's extremely important, because at the moment there's very few that are actually in that situation. And I would look also at really this method of, it's got to be compliance driven first, where we are at sort of compliance, what our risks are. So compliance first, then strategy. We've got to have a strategy on each of these properties, and then action. Now, what we're going to need to do. There's no properties on the list that are, that everything's sort of far from perfect, really. Everything needs, does need action. And it also, obviously, that's going to come down to funding as well. What funding is available to, to put the work in place. But I think compliance first is the way forwards, and that would include making sure that the properties are transferred into the correct, names. And if there are missing, obviously missing, some properties are not actually even registered. So it's to ensure that that's all put in place.
Okay.
But I say what I've done is provided the list of the properties. Then I've gone into more details on some examples of, of where I'm, of where I'm at, and what I'm working on at the moment. But from my point of view as well, I'm looking for your input as far as, what are the priorities from my side? What do you want from your property manager? At the moment I am being pulled in quite a few directions. I know that's an understatement. So what do you want me to focus on? What do we need to get to, and at what sort of speed? Because then we can put some of the other properties to one side and say, look, let's focus in on the most urgent ones that we need to tackle, and that could include here as well. And I think this is a big factor that we need to move very quickly on the Ginkle.
Yeah. Okay. Does anybody have any comments on what Julian's?
I think when we appointed the property manager, the intention was that we really get to grips with 20-30 years of neglect and maladministration, if you like, in terms of our assets. So I think for me the key priority, and I think we need to set targets for this and deadlines, is to get the ownership situation sorted out, because unless we know who owns these properties,
Yes,
we cannot do anything.
exactly.
We cannot move forward. So it might be worth, Chair, going through each of these in turn. I don't know if that would be the best way forward, but I think the property manager really needs to focus on establishing title and perhaps seeking legal advice if necessary, in order that we can get a definitive list of whether the town council owns it, whether DDC owns it, whether
Yes.
STC owns it, or someone else owns it. Because unless we know that, we can't really.
Exactly. No, I agree. That exercise was actually done in 2020, when the properties were sent over to a solicitor for them to look through, and nothing came of that as far as that didn't move forward. So they put their fee proposal in that didn't go forward. So yes, we're going to need legal advice. We need to be instructed to be taken seriously. You've got to be looking to instruct a solicitor to deal with the individual properties. Now, whether that's done at the same time as trying to deal with the sandwich agreement is another matter. I would separate them personally. I would separate them and deal with them. But each of the properties, and we've put it on the list here, we can run through them. But we need to, would you like me to go? Just go through them.
I don't think we do at the moment,
okay.
Julian. If you don't mind,
No, that's
because I'm very conscious that this is a working group,
Yes.
and we're here, to work. And the job that we've been given is to explore the relationship. The terms of reference of this working group are restricted to the relationship between Sandwich Town Council and the Toll Bridge Fund.
Right.
Now, an important part of that is obviously the property aspects,
Yes.
but it's one aspect of that relationship. And for me, we need to be clear as to what the objectives and aims of this group are
Yes,
against the overall other things and, you know, the devolution and other aspects that are going on,
yes,
which are kind of separate subjects, because whilst they're interlinked, I think for me, if we confuse them, we will end up with, you know, an ongoing situation.
yeah,
And I think from my point of view as chair, we were given, you know, a clear terms of reference on between the Tollbridge Fund and Sandwich Town Council, and we should focus on that. And
Yes.
we should. The working group is only supposed to last 6 months,
yes,
and so I think when we get into the next item on the agenda to talk about the priorities,
yes.
we can then discuss what needs doing in terms of the
That
property.
makes perfect
And
sense.
so,
Yeah,
okay.
yes.
Anybody have any thoughts?
Yeah, I suppose pulling out the sandwich agreement, that is a piece in its own right, that is under this working group. So I think we need to make sure that we pick that up in the STBF finance, and we need to focus on that because the lease itself is up for renewal early next year. There is devolution, there is 2 Market Street, there is uncertainty about the terms of all the stuff. It's all captured within that. So I don't need to go any more about that, but we need to make sure we pick it up in the STBF finance, and it then answers your point about keeping it separate, because actually it is separate.
Yeah,
Mm.
that makes perfect sense.
Okay. All right, everybody happy? Any other further comments on this property manager's update? It's really useful what you're doing, Julian, and I'm not dismissing it. You
No,
know.
to be honest, there's still so much more, as you can probably gather. There's
Okay.
still other information I'm gathering, and things I'm finding out, you know, discovering as you know, as I go.
Yeah.
I'm not sure whether here's the place to talk about it, but there's certain things that I've seen that need to be actioned.
Yeah.
So, and I'm going to be working closely with the interim RFO.
Right. As well.
Yeah.
Okay. All right. Thank you for that.
Chair,
Yeah.
some months ago, just on one of these, Boatman's Hill Chapel,
Yes. Yes.
some months ago we asked for a response about the covenant.
Yes, that I still haven't heard back from DDC. I've chased them again. I had a meeting actually with the town clerk and their surveyor, and she said she'll come back to me. She did come back to me and said we're still working on it. We'll come back. So it's still ongoing. We are actually utilising the chapel at the moment for storage, which is freeing up some space that we can do something with here as well. But yeah, I'm still waiting to hear on that from DDC. And I think that is, we've on the legal side, we have the legal documentation that show that we've got the title deeds. So I've got the title deeds which we found, but that hasn't been transferred over. At Land Registry, it's still registered as DDC, so that needs to be transferred over. And to say the covenants, that's what we're trying to take the covenant off that restricts the use. So as I mentioned before, typically you have a value, you agree a value where it is with the covenant, and then you have a value where it would be without the covenant, and then there's a calculation on the difference, on the spread.
Okay. Well, you know that again. You know, I think we're talking about a property which would ultimately become clearly Sandwich Town Council and nothing to do with the Tollbridge Fund.
That's right, it's STC, it's in the name of STC, not as trustee, it's purely in the name of STC, it just hasn't been registered that way.
Okay.
So,
Right. So
The other one on here is Fishergate, which there's no title or.
no, I can't find the title, though I have the document which shows that it was, you know, ready for them to register it with the transfer. But I haven't actually, I can't see that transfer actually, so they've got the transfer document, but it doesn't appear that property's actually been registered. So they've got the transfer document, it looks like someone didn't take it that next step. But I say, unless I find other documents that, you know, that backs that up, at the moment, I say we've got the transfer, got that information, but I can't find it actually that particular property a registration number.
But, and again, that's a property that would be registered to Somerset Town Council.
That, exactly.
So-
And that was the point. They tried originally, we were looking at to register it as Tollbridge Fund, and then there's a letter on the file from the Charity Commission to say, sorry, it can't be done that way. It's got to be STC, but that doesn't mean that you can actually not fund it, sorry, do the maintenance, or some money can be dealt with through the Tollbridge Fund. So, yeah.
You know, that's what we're here to kind of
Yes.
resolve.
Yeah, so I've got that. I've got the documentation on that side.
Okay, thank you.
So
Right.
it is owned by STC.
It is STC,
We
yes.
don't yet have the.
I haven't, I'm not saying it doesn't exist, I've gone through everything, I've looked on the, you know, obviously I've got access to land registry, I can't see it. I can't see it on there, but I've got all the documentation that's needed. If it doesn't, that's very straightforward.
Right.
It's
Well,
just-
that's another job of the Finance and General Purposes Committee at another stage when you report in on STC property.
It's just a risk when we're doing all this work on properties when we don't know that we definitely own. There could be someone come out of the woodwork said, actually,
So
I was
all the
left that way.
documentation shows that you've got the original, there's an original document going back from the 1920s, and then that was transferred over. I've got that transfer document. That's watertight. You've got the original and you've got that, but they just haven't gone to the next stage where then someone said, okay, we're going to register it at land registry.
Okay.
So, but that one I am. That one's better than an off, I think. Yeah. So.
Okay, can we move on then to the next item on the agenda, the priorities and actions for the next 6 months? So just kind of by way of introducing this, I have kind of given it a little bit of thought myself, and if I can just share my thoughts and then we could kind of go around the table. The first thing, that this is kind of a working group with a 6-month kind of time frame. So the first thing I propose is we divide it into periods and have target periods. So the first is kind of the gathering of the data that we need. The second period would be the analysis of that data. The third period would be developing the options. And the fourth period would be reporting and closing out. And I think, you know, that is a relatively standard approach, and I hope everybody would buy into kind of working that way. The second thing I would say is, in order to kind of move through that, we need to kind of have separate work streams to look at the different things. And I'm suggesting at the moment the first work stream is a legal one, and maybe we can come back and discuss and brainstorm the contents of each of these work streams. The first one is a legal one, the second one is a finance one, the third one is an organisational one, the fourth one is a physical property one, and the fifth one is a staffing one. So we need to, in my mind, look at each of those work streams, see what the kind of the picture is, and then when we've got all of that data, we can start to analyse it in a constructive manner. Now, we don't know what the analysis is going to show up, but without kind of understanding, I think those 5 aspects, you know, we're going to flounder and we'll just kind of keep going around in a loop. Has anybody got any thoughts on those work streams? Is everybody happy about that I haven't kind of missed a work stream? Okay, well, this is just kick off. So from the legal point of view, I think some of the key things we need to understand there are the title or the leases, the conditions associated with the lease, and any kind of obligations, you know, that are kind of form of those conditions, the terms of the lease and all of those types of things. So that's the first thing we need to look at for the properties between Sandwich Town Council and the Toll Bridge Fund. So the big one that falls into that bracket is this. But any other properties that the Toll Bridge own or the Sandwich Town Council own, if it's clear that they are the sole owners of them,
Yes.
we don't really want, we want to park those and make that clear. So that's why the report that you've done so far is really helpful.
Mm.
So that's the first thing about the properties. The second thing that we need to be clear about is if there's any agreements between Sandwich Town Council and the Toll Bridge Fund. If there's anything in the legal governance documents of the Toll Bridge Fund in respect of Sandwich Town Council or likewise. So we just need to understand exactly what's there, what's written. This is a contract between Sandwich Town Council, where they are joint and severally liable or whatever the things are. We need to map all of those things out to be clear, because one of the big things for me is there's no agreement. There is an understanding that the Toll Bridge Fund will contribute so much or Sandwich Town Council will contribute so much, but it's not documented anyway. So that's the type of thing I would like, for us to, address under the legal work stream. Any comments on legal thoughts or anything else that needs to go in the work stream? This isn't definitive now because, I think we need to list out what the work stream is going to achieve as part of the minutes, and this is a working group, so it's not, roll up every month or whatever, and it's what we actually do between the months to actually look at the papers and so forth. Okay. All right, good. The second thing, from a finance point of view, I think we need to understand exactly what's going on, because it seems to me there's a lot of work that's done by the RFO transferring money from Sandwich Town Council into the Guildhall account, and from the Sandwich Town, from the Toll Bridge Fund into the Guildhall account, and from Sandwich Town Council to the Toll Bridge Fund, and from the Toll Bridge. It seems to me that there are dozens and dozens of transactions every year on this front, which is generating a huge amount of work for people.
Yeah.
And is it really necessary? We can come to thinking about that, but I would like to understand exactly how many transactions there are, and look at the period of the last year in terms of, what monies have been flowing and how much, get a table of them, dates or whatever, the number of transactions, the amount of money. I've seen transactions for a penny, why, it's madness, it's madness. So maybe it isn't madness, maybe it's absolutely perfectly legal, proper, and following due process, but I think we do need to understand exactly what it is and the quantum. From a physical property point of view, it seems to me that we've got this beside this building, and there are parts of it which are the responsibility of the Toll Bridge Fund, and there are other parts which are the responsibility of Town Council, and then there are other parts which are, jointly treated. So we need to understand the areas and the amount of foot square and what the running costs is associated with those areas, because it's just to map it out so that we can understand, do we really need all of this building? What do we need? So to get a view on the physical property allocation between the Town Council and the Toll Bridge Fund.
I did, after our meeting, I did a sort of
Quick draft.
it was quite long actually.
Oh, no.
When I got to the end, and the IFO time looked and said, "You've got that around the wrong way anyway." You know, so yeah, I mean, it is complex.
Yeah.
The arrangements, you know, and I was looking at how much time Holbridge Fund would even, just taking this room as an example, how much time said, no, you should be the other way around. How much time STC are in the room, you know.
Yeah.
But yeah, there are calculations, and it's a very long, long process. I'm also looking at how the building could work if it was configured differently.
Well, that's the optioneering we can get to later on. That's the third phase of my kind of programme.
Yes.
Let's get the data, let's analyse it, and then do some optioneering.
But would you see that there's an advantage in knowing the actual sort of thoughts of the councillors as far as what they actually want to at the end? You know, as far as, you know, what do people have in their mind as far as the building and its future?
Well, what we might need to do is to do a survey, but that would come out as part of our data analysis and everything like that. So if we've got some data that we can share with people and say, you know, this is what we've got, what options, maybe we need to have an extraordinary general meeting of the whole council to present the options and just, you know, and use that meeting as a kind of a working meeting to feed it. So that's kind of that stream that I've kind of got in mind, you know, you've already given it some thought, Jeremy, which is great. So hopefully Julian's right.
Because what you like, that's fine. Oh no, I've gone past the actual thinking stage. I'm actually there. You know, it's just, you know, I know what we could do.
Okay.
You know?
Well, then for the next meeting, if you can head up that property, physical property work,
physical here with everything in mind.
And bring that along. That would be great. Then from an organisational work stream, you know, obviously the way we're organised in terms of the management of it, the way we're organised, kind of struggling a little bit now, but you know, this is kind of where I was getting to in terms of the service level agreements and so forth, you know, how it all is organised, and maybe you need to give that work stream a bit more thought, but from an organisational point of view.
I understand that. Yeah, I understand that. In a way, it needs to be so separated. You've got to look at it as a totally separate entity.
Yeah.
And,
Well, that's
in my opinion, that's the only way. It's too close.
Yeah.
And until you can separate that out, then it's very difficult to get a clear picture, because it's too muddled, as you say.
Yeah. And then the final work stream was the staffing one. You know, we've got kind of on one side we've got our town clerk and an assistant town clerk and the property, and then on another side we've got the museum manager, you know, who's clearly budgeted at the moment to the Tollbridge Fund, and then in between we've got a whole raft of people like yourself, Julian, and the porters, the caretakers, the cleaners, and all of these type of things, security. So we've got all of these other things.
And I think when you see my idea or my plans for the building, that actually becomes very clear as well on that side.
Yeah. Okay. So if everybody's in line,
if I say too much.
But if everybody's in line with kind of those work streams, so you know, and then what I'd like to try and do, if I may, is allocate people who are going to take the lead on each of these work streams, because otherwise, you know, it all falls back to one person or whatever, and you know, we are a working group and we're here to work. So, Julian, you're going to look at the property aspect.
The building, yes.
The property allocation, the building.
Guildhall.
And any other properties that are are in the mix here.
Yes, I mean, the Guildhall is a standalone project, I'll be quite honest.
That's under STBF, so let's not consume.
No, but this is looking at the relationship
It
between
is,
here
yeah,
and the
yeah.
STBF.
Yeah. Okay. Right. Okay. This is a complexity. It's just consuming all your time on an STBF assets may be an issue in terms of this working group, which is looking particularly at the relationship is the key thing. But also we've got a number of STC assets. So when you introduce this item about prioritising, I just wondered whether also, and work streams is completely right, but whether any of these assets we should park. I don't know. I'm just to ask a question, because things like Bowman's Chapel.
Oh yeah, we don't.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's not in the mix here. It's as far as this working group is concerned. Fishergate isn't in the mix here as far as this working group is concerned.
Okay.
In my mind, if it's an STC asset and it's clearly Sandwich Town Council and it's got nothing other than, a begging bowl to the toll bridge fund for funds, it's clearly it falls under the auspices
Right.
and
So you're
control
coming from
and the care and custody of Sandwich Town Council.
Okay, so you're coming from the aspect because the Guildhall itself is a very mixed
That's
picture.
exactly right.
Right.
And if
I
there are
understand
any
your
other
rationale.
buildings, but we need to be, that's why we need to be clear about the legal title of all of the buildings.
Mhm.
And if it's not kind of very clear, the intent is very clear that Fishergate is going to be a Sandwich Town Council asset, not a toll bridge fund asset.
That's right.
Yeah. You happy with that?
Yes.
I agree with the work streams, it absolutely makes sense. I think for me, I mean, you've raised an important issue because we are sitting here as STC councillors and we're talking about STBF assets, which we have no mandate over as STC councillors. The trustees of the Tollbridge Fund have mandate over those properties. So it's a very complex.
That's
you
one.
know, and so if we just spent 10 minutes in this meeting talking about an STBF asset, we then charge the STBF for that and then back to STC and you can see how complex that is.
Yes. It does highlight, doesn't it?
Yeah.
Just that highlights how.
But I think in terms of the work streams, what follows on from that is the big picture, or predates the 5 work streams, is the big picture, which is why do we own these assets? Do we need to own them? How did we get to own them?
Yes.
What's the history, and should we carry on owning them, and what benefit do they bring to the council, the Tollbridge Fund and the town generally?
I understand that. For me, that's kind of part of the auctioneering. To say that these assets are falling into this relationship, which is causing this relationship between the Sandwich Town Council and the Tollbridge Fund to be complicated. If it's Tollbridge asset, Tollbridge, you deal with it. But for some of these properties, we don't exactly know. We think it's such, but it's not necessarily.
It should be a simple relationship, but it's been allowed to become very, very complex.
And
over
I think what we're ultimately, charged with trying to do is to simplify that arrangement if we possibly can, because the way it's going on, it's become unsustainable.
Yes.
And it all comes back to that lease which says jointly and severally. So that, I think, for me, in terms of priorities, that's the absolute priority. Sitting out with DDC to try and work out what we do with this building and the lease.
But let's get it all down so that we understand between Tollbridge Fund and Sandwich Town Council. And I'm very clear, and I'll be a pain. We're here as a working group to look at that relationship. What we do with these assets is a devolution, it's another strategy, but it's not. From that point of view, as I understand it, Julian, you are reporting to the council through the Finance and General Purposes Committee and to the Tollbridge Fund. That's your kind of reporting lines, obviously involving the town clerk. Okay, so Julian, you're going to look at the physical property and you're well
Yes.
down that. Cost and finance. Is anybody willing to look at the cost and finance relationship? Danielle, would you, is that something that you would be
Okay then, yeah.
interested? That's great, thank you. From a legal point of view,
I would have thought that's ideally would be Councillor Gray.
yeah, but he's,
Although we don't even know if he will be sitting on this working group, do we, till he returns?
all right, so,
I think Julian should lead on that, if you're
Well,
already
he
started.
has, I know Councillor Gray has, very recently, probably in the last 2 years, looked at the assets and has analysed, you know, so he has gone through that
he has
process.
done some work.
That information, yeah,
Okay.
but that needs now to move on to giving, I know we're obviously providing legal advice, but we still need to move to the next stage, which is, you know,
And that's,
instructing.
yeah, but this is exactly what I'm saying about this. Let's gather the data,
Yes,
and then if we need to, when we move to the data analysis,
Yes.
to appoint a solicitor,
yeah,
or to appoint a surveyor, or to appoint, you know, an accountancy practice, or,
Yeah.
you know, whoever, we'll do it at that stage. But, you know, until we've actually got all of the data together, I'm reluctant to say,
Yeah.
you know, let's not prejudge the situation.
yeah, no, I understand that, but on certain properties, I think we need to, again, prioritise what is important on that aspect. You know, if there are properties that need to have the transfer
Yeah.
done sooner rather than later, then that's that. And, you know,
Yeah, well, let's address that, and,
Yes.
you know, when we've got the data, we can then refer these other
Yes.
matters to the finance and general purposes or to the
Yes.
council. It's not for this working group.
Could I just ask Julian a question? Because if you look at the STBF assets as we believe they are now, most of them, or is it none of them, are allocated to, so the land at the rear of the, is that down as an STBF? The issue I've got is the vast majority, if not all of them, actually aren't allocated correctly.
That's right. Yeah.
So,
Yeah.
sorry, my question is, if we were to attempt to drop one of these assets into a charity, is that going to throw up any legal issues?
That's why I'm saying we need to get the names correct first, I believe, before.
Yeah, if
Actually-
we find there are gaps, I think maybe the rules today, are they the same as they were 20, 30, 40 years ago? If we say, well, actually, we've always said this is an STBF asset,
Yeah.
but we can't do it because actually the rules don't allow us to do it. So I'm just making that.
And I think that's the whole point. And I think the sandwich agreement, I think someone would have, if it was that straight, you know, if it was straightforward to say, oh, this is the asset, we're going to transfer it over, they would have done it already. And I think this is it. This is why I think they do need to be, you know, they need to be tackled. So yeah, you can't put a property in the name of the toll bridge. That's a fact. You cannot put a property in the name of Sandwich Toll Bridge Fund as a freehold owner. It cannot happen. That's a fact.
Well, I don't think the council appreciate and know that, nor do the public.
And that was my point.
And this is what we've got to flush out
Yeah.
from this legal review.
Yeah.
And we get it in the report.
That's in its current setup.
It
As
is,
it is in its current setup. That doesn't mean if it was altered before that was
well,
changed.
that altering it then becomes an option. So let's
Yeah.
focus on
Yeah.
the kind of the immediate kind of things.
Sorry, can you clarify, why can't a charity own property, freehold property?
I think the link is to it's the setup of the
The
actual
government
charity
document
itself.
of the charity.
Of how it's done with the trustees. It cannot own a property. Cannot own a property.
But charities can own property.
Charities can, if they're incorporated in a certain way,
Yeah,
and this isn't.
okay.
I can remember asking this question some time ago. I have never seen the Tollbridge Fund's governing document.
I haven't. I've seen a document, Town Park, that said that they can take income from a property.
Yeah.
Even if that said that they could own a property, they can't.
Yeah.
They can take income from a property and can spend, and it goes into what they could use the money for, doesn't it?
Yeah, it's the Bridge Act,
But
isn't
it
it?
can't. Yes, but that it cannot own the property.
It refers to the Act of Parliament, doesn't it, 1754?
Bridge Act.
That, yes,
When you
that
go
was
on
just yes.
Charity Commission website, every charity has a governing document, but I've never
Yeah.
seen it for this Tollbridge Fund.
Well, these are all of the things that, because one of the options might be to change the governing arrangements or the status of the toll bridge fund,
Or change the status of the asset.
or change the status of the asset, or, you know, whatever. There's got to be, you know, all sorts of different options, maybe even to, you know, to disband the toll bridge fund. Anyway,
That's theorising.
that
Yeah.
it's just, it's,
Yeah.
all I'm saying is
Yeah.
that nothing is off
No,
the
absolutely.
table. I'm not prejudging it or anything like that, but we need to keep all options. We need to develop those options when we've looked at the data and had a chance to do some proper analysis.
But I really think, if Julian's happy with this, I really think he needs to lead on the legal aspects.
Oh, yes.
Maybe with Councillor
Yeah.
Gray giving advice.
Yeah.
And if Councillor Gray isn't able to give advice, let's get a legal company in, that somebody
That has,
who can provide the resources over the period of time that we want this.
Because this is clearly an executive function where what we want to end up with is a physical document or
Mhm.
an online document giving chapter and verse on every property, title, asset, rent, income, history, blah, blah, blah.
Yeah.
You know, an asset register. in effect.
Yes.
Yeah, but that's not for this working group. That's not for this working group, you know, so we need to
But on that list, it
focus
should
on.
say the correct names of who it is actually in. as well.
That's all
Yeah.
we need to know for
Yeah.
the purposes of this working group. Okay, so then there are two other work streams, the staffing aspects. Would you
I'm happy to pick those up. Yeah.
I'd be happy to pick that up, because I think, you know, in your role as mayor, you've probably got a closer view of that than
Yeah.
anybody else. And I'll pick up the organisational work stream. Okay? So I think it's for each of us then, you know, we've talked about some of the scope of the work stream, but for each of the work stream leaders to kind of to develop it out and you know, kind of report back, and that brings us to the date and time and place of the next meeting, unless anybody else has got any other comments about any of the aspects we've touched on.
I haven't any other comments. How far in advance are we looking in terms of coming back?
Well, I think we've got a 6-month programme, so I think we need to 4 weeks is an adequate period of time, I would have thought, for us to do some of these tasks. So
Yeah.
I would suggest if we come back in a month's time, which is about the 7th or the 13th of July.
So I think that's okay. I suppose my slight concern, because I'm just thinking it through in terms of where would I go and try and get stuff, so I'll probably start asking Town Clerk and the team. So my concern is we might just sort of, whilst we will own work streams, we might put it all in the lap so that can provide X, Y and Z. So we need to be really aware of the impact.
Well, I think for the, you know, yeah, we understand that, but for the HR committee, we have got an allocation of time by staff members to different budgets, haven't we?
Yeah.
Which
Yes,
is a
exactly.
great start.
Yeah.
We've got documentation down the street, and then there are other things that you could do in terms of that. Is you could actually go and talk to. Well, once we've got the report from Julian, it says that, you know, there's 4,000 square feet here and 1,800 of it is toll bridge. You know, how much time do you spend cleaning them or counting the power sockets or whatever it is to determine how much electricity is actually used. Whatever we're going to do, I don't know, you know, but those are the types of things. I don't think we need to trouble the town clerk all of the time. yes, a quick
So,
chat or a quick phone call type of thing, but I don't think we want to have the town clerk as, you know, a bottleneck in making progress this because of all of her other commitments.
but then from my point of view, finance, can I actually contact because I need some figures to work on.
Yes, yes,
So-
so I can work with the interim
Is that all
RFO,
right? If I
yeah,
find out what I need, if I
Yes.
email you, if
Yeah.
you don't mind.
yeah,
Okay.
that's fine.
Because I don't think I can access budget the finance.
No.
I'm quite happy to
Okay.
give you some thoughts on the finance.
Yes, that'd be great, yes.
If this is a 6-month programme of work, that's quite a lot to do at a time also when the RFO has left, the town clerk is retiring, puts a lot of burden on Julia to get lots of this done. But I think what we need to do if we're meeting monthly is to set targets for each meeting. So for example, for the next meeting, I think rather than talking about the same old issues again, that we actually set a target to say by the time of the next meeting we need a definitive response from DDC
Yes,
about the lease, what the options are for the lease,
yeah.
about transferring the freehold or whatever the
So
situation
maybe
might
the
be.
town clerk can update us on that.
Yeah, so what we need initially is a consensus from the council that that's what they want to do. They want to explore the freehold, because at the moment we haven't got that. Haven't got a minute that says that the council wants to explore owning the freehold of Guildhall or whatever it is. So we need that initially before Dover District Council can then go to their members, because again, but we had the conversation with Roger Walton before he retired, and he said to me, what you need to do first is the town council, and then we can go to Dover District Council.
It sounds a bit chicken and egg, so can we not just say to them, what are your options for the building?
No, so they're not going to operate that way. They want a clear consensus from the town council to say what it is that you'd like to explore, because they're not going to have resource and capacity to explore various options to come to us. So they want the town council initially, and it's not to say that they're going to agree to what the town council wants, but at least they'll know that, you know, they've got a clear steer of what the council is thinking.
But the 16 town councillors here need some information before they make a decision about, you know, what are the ramifications of owning this building.
Yeah, yeah. So
What are
Julie,
the long-term obligations and the financial obligations and the, you know,
you've already got
legal
the
obligations.
financial obligations at the moment. Really
I'm
good.
actually, yeah, I did work on quite a bit before, just after Christmas actually. And I've been working on other, that are relative as well, as far as, I don't know if it's difficult to explain.
So they want, Jill, a resolution from this council saying, we are interested in exploring the possibility of owning the freehold of the building.
Yes.
So before there was something that they were looking at themselves, I don't know whether that ever came over, about 2018, that they came up with, at that point, it was actually them, I think, that came up with the proposal. I think it was that way around, wasn't it, then?
Yes, yes.
Of how that could work, how it would work from their point of view at the time, what they would look at. And I've got that information, and I'm not sure how many councillors are actually aware of what they were looking at before, which gives us a good indication of perhaps what they'd be looking at this time round. So we have that information.
But it didn't go, it fell at the last hurdle, if you like, here, because the councillors decided they were not going to do it.
And were they doing that as the town council as opposed to STBF? Because we,
Only to the town council.
It was the town council.
right, because currently it's.
They would be able to transfer it to STB, yeah.
So surely this is a report that needs to be prepared
It is.
and submitted to the town
It is,
council.
yeah,
So is
absolutely.
it possible to have that for the meeting at the end of this month?
I'll try.
What's that?
A
Just
report.
about the Guildhall, the report about the Guildhall. It's the 23rd of June. So we'd have to-
My report about the Guildhall.
So I'll need to work with you on it as well.
Yes, I was just thinking also what's on there.
I think we don't need to commit at this
Start.
stage.
See where people have been coming in and been registering, is it all part of that as well?
No, not really, that'd be a separate,
Would it?
yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
But sorry, can we just unpick this or
Yeah.
unpack it? So
Yes.
unpack it. So the sandwich agreement is between DDC and
And STC and SDBF jointly,
Jointly.
yes,
yes.
that's the lease, that agreement and that leases.
And the
Well,
Guildhall-
that's exactly what we need. I don't understand what's on this,
Mm.
Yeah.
you know, and that's what this working group
Yes,
is about, you know. So I'm reluctant, you know, for us to get involved in putting DDC on the critical path of it, because that's not our gift.
No, it's not.
But all we need is a resolution at the next meeting, whether we have a report or not. Just saying,
Explore.
we would like to explore the possibility
Yes.
of owning this building.
yeah,
And discussing that with the Tollbridge Fund and seeing what the ramifications are.
So, yeah, sorry, I know I'm being hopefully not too pedantic, but within the sandwich agreement there's also 2 Market Streets. So
Yes.
we can't just, in my opinion, just pick up the building here and say we'll have a conversation, because actually we have to understand the sandwich agreement. Some of us have got copies of it, but all
Yeah.
councillors haven't. And you need to understand what that agreement is about, because ultimately
Sorry.
that's what we're currently on the hook for, and we're on it for a long period of time.
yes.
So all that's coming up is the lease renewal period. Is that
There's
right?
no lease renewal
Oh,
on
no.
this building,
So-
yeah.
so-
That's the car park.
Yeah,
which is
sorry,
separate.
yeah, you're right.
Yes, yeah.
Apologies.
No, we
so
really-
we've
there's no
got
break
many,
clause.
many years as a lease
Oh, yeah.
for this building.
Yeah,
So, but it is complicated because it's an agreement as opposed to a building lease.
it's what it is, it's like it's a lease for property, and in there they've mixed up all this other agreement put it all together, mixed
Yeah.
it up, and then, it's not surprising it took 10 years. But put it all together and you look at it and you think, wow, you know.
Yeah.
And it's, I've got my head around it.
Which is brilliant.
Well, somebody has. But
Just
you-
seen a copy.
Sorry,
Just have you seen the copy of the sandwich
have
agreement?
I seen it?
Yeah.
I'm pretty
I
certain
have.
I've sent it to everybody. I did the Bridge Act.
You probably did.
But I think what would be useful to have, which I have done, was sort of like like bullet points, like a summary of it,
Mm.
because it's difficult trying to find
Yeah.
and where it actually went wrong, because it started off favouring one part and then it sort of swung the other way,
Yeah.
and it got very complex. You know, it was really complex. We got a bit complex, and you have to understand what situation we're in now with how it actually worked then, and what is happening or not happening now as well.
Well,
But legal advice on that would have someone sit down and look at it from a legal point of view. Is key. That's what they tried to do before.
right, well, you know, let's refresh it.
Yeah.
And let's get people kind of focused on it type of thing, and get it communicated so that we can
Yes.
understand what's involved in it, because everybody uses this word, it's overcomplicated, or term, it's overcomplicated.
No, it's actually once you sit and read it, you just cut everything else and get to the actual facts of it. It is actually it's just it's complex as far as it's very unusual to mix everything up and put it into one document.
Okay, well, let's leave it with the town clerk as to whether you want to bring a report or a resolution or whatever to the town council.
Mm.
That's a separate matter from the purposes of this work stream. We just need to map out, as I said earlier, as part of the legal, what the lease is, what's the key terms, and what's,
Yes.
so it's clear to this working group as
Yes.
it impacts Sandwich Town Council and the
Yeah.
Tollbridge.
Sorry, Chair, but if this working group is to make progress, we do need a resolution at that meeting to ask DDC for their, what they would offer us in terms of.
Well, isn't that going to come out as part of the devolution process? I don't know that they've got the headspace for all of this at the moment. I don't think you're going to get a response from them, but if the formality is for us to have made a resolution to actually have the first step of the dance, well then, but I think they will lead us a merry dance, but if we need that resolution, it's to the town clerk.
I think unless you do that, we can't start on the path of anywhere. And what might happen is you get to devolution, there will be a unitary authority and they will then be the landlord for the town council. That might not be a very comfortable position, is, you know, people are talking about these sorts of things.
Yeah.
So I think it seriously needs to be looked at, and it's time is of the essence really, because if they get to the 28th of November and then all of a sudden the districts and the county council are told, actually, you can't, you know, give any assets to anybody, there's going to be strict guidelines on how you can do it, and, you know, you might then have lost that window of opportunity. So if it's something you want to explore, and that's for the council to decide, then I think it needs to be done sooner rather than later to start that conversation.
Ball's in your court now on that one, Tom.
The trouble is the sandwich agreement is a bit like the Schleswig-Holstein question, isn't it? That very few people in the world understand it. But the trouble is, it was written at a time by people who are no longer there. Roger Morton's no longer there, so things have been said about you can have this in exchange for this, but are the new people signed up to that?
Yes,
So
it.
you need to just ask the question ASAP.
Yeah. And the other thing is,
What's the
the other property, do you actually, is it owned to be able to do it anyway? Are you actually allowed to transfer that as part of it? So there were so many question marks.
Okay, well let's
Let's
strip it, unpack it as we say, and address each question and one at a time type of thing, but we can't.
So the resolution needs to say if we were to acquire or if you were to offer the freehold of this building, what would be the
That's right.
The
What are you
terms and
looking
conditions.
for from
Yeah.
our side? Yeah.
what would be the deal?
That's it. Yeah. How would that look? And then we can look at, you know, how that can, you know, be calculated from our end. Yes, I can work out. We know the cost of the building. You can do £1 per square foot. You can do how often that room's being used and everything else. But that could. My concern is that could then. I mean, that's not something to do in a month. I've got a lot of the information together, but it could go on, and then we suddenly miss it. We miss that opportunity. If you think it's an opportunity, I personally do think it's an opportunity. We miss that opportunity. We could run the risk, couldn't we? And miss that opportunity.
Yeah.
So, but then you'd have to explore does the council want to acquire this building for a peppercorn presumably?
Yeah.
What are the implications?
Yeah.
If it was purely in STC's name, that solves all the problems to some extent, doesn't it? Because then you've got a clear ownership.
Yeah.
The Tollbridge Fund and Maddox are separate, independent charities.
Yeah.
And everything's much simpler.
Yeah, and you could then have you could then look at it separately and have our own sandwich agreement in effect, but with a separate entity, you know.
Except for, if I'm honest.
Yeah.
So again, if the building became all STC owned, all we would be doing is actually exaggerating the relationship between STBF and STC, because this building we couldn't run as a council, and if we looked for STBF to fund it, then actually by it not being jointly owned, we then actually are doing what we've all criticised previous councils about, is using the STBF to finance the STC through the Guildhall. So it's just.
But if the Tollbridge Fund can't own buildings,
I know.
so we're going around in circles again,
Yeah.
type of thing, and that's why we've just got to all have a kind of a common vision as to the steps that we want to take, and let's try and stick to that and not get distracted by all of these other threads that are around, because a lot of these other things, you know, are in the ballpark of the town clerk to do, you know, that they're not necessarily, they've been there before this working group, it's just needs to be done. So, okay, so I think that I'm really keen that we keep focused, because if we try and solve the world,
Yes,
I agree.
we'll break out. So let's just stick with our.
But I think for people to make a decision, I think they also have to have options of what the building could look like as an option afterwards as well.
Yeah.
All right,
Because
so
I
that's
think
our
decisions-
auctioneering phase, Julia. That's our auctioneering
Right,
phase.
for me, I think it could be part of the, you know, certainly with this particular building, I think people could look at it differently if they could see how it could be, you know, I can't really say it, how can we sort of split, I suppose is the best, how we could divide the actual physical building, how that could look, the figures.
That's something real. Once we've got the data, let's analyse it to help develop
Yes.
the options. Okay, we've had an hour. Has anybody got any concerns about what we're proposing to do? Okay, so shall we meet in a month's time? I think it's about the 7th of July, same time, same channel. You happy with that, everyone? Okay.
Is it HR committee that day?
There or thereabouts.
Yeah,
6:30.
6:30.
So it's
You
5
could do 5 o'clock.
5 o'clock.
Yeah.
Will it be 5 o'clock?
Okay, thank you everybody. Let's close the meeting.
Excuse me, Chair, I'd like to say item 5, public participation. The public weren't invited to speak at this meeting. Instead, the wording says, as per the terms of reference, members to debate whether there can be a part of the meetings of the fixed assets, of the Finance and Assets Working Group, where the public have a right to speak, decision required. So it was about deciding whether the public would be invited in the future, but there was no actual invitation to today's meeting.
Okay, sorry, that's a mistake on my part. Do we want to involve the public then? At
Yes.
this working group, yeah?
It's a working group, why do we need public? It's a working group, it's really just working an hour, not like a council meeting. It's not a council meeting, it's a working group. So I don't
Okay.
think we need public participation.
Okay,
Just my suggestion, just we
I
can
think
have
just on the principle of openness and transparency, we should, if anyone wishes to come along and speak, we should allow them.
But they can come to finance
do so.
meeting, committee, let's say. I'm just thinking, because we have really short time, only an hour allowed, before there's another meeting coming along. I just want suggesting,
yeah, I understand your suggestion. I actually think there'd be very little uptake, but if anybody does, they'll obviously have a view and it could be worth listening to.
I just think if you say no one can come and speak, it just makes it
difficult,
seem
yeah.
a bit secretive.
So what is the core of this working group? So there's 5 of us,
Yes.
with minimum 3, is it?
Yeah.
Yes.
Up to 9 or 10, I think.
It's a
The working
quorum
group,
is
core
three.
for our a little working group, there's 5 of us. So 3 people here can have a meeting.
Membership was up to 9.
Yeah, we've got any,
Yeah, I'm sure it's
is that right? Okay. 3 then.
okay, thanks for raising that, Christine. Okay,
So it's
Maximum
confirmed,
numbers
it's
9.
It's a yes. It's a yes.
Yes.
Yeah.
Do we need to vote as well? Okay.
well, we
Should
can,
we just vote? Yeah. Okay.
Thank you very much.
all right, thank you.
Excuse me.